Welcome back. This is session 2, and we're going to talk about 4 basic reasons for conflict. Now, I've already told you the primary reason you have conflict. You deal with people. But I want to emphasize how important it is to understand primary reasons for conflict. Because if you treat all conflict the same and react to it in the same way, you will often just create more conflict instead of resolving it. What I mean is, don't kill a fly with a shovel, and don't try to kill a snake with a fly swatter. But if you don't take the time to understand if you have a fly size or a snake size conflict, not a snake size person, then you will use the same strategy for dealing with all conflict and you'll just create more of it. William Tecumseh Sherman was a major player in one of the greatest conflicts our country has ever seen, the Civil War. He was in conflict with the Confederates, and his way of dealing with the conflict was to burn everything down. He called it the scorched earth policy. That is not a good strategy. If you don't know what kind of conflict you are dealing with, you can go into scorched earth mode or even live and let live mode. Both are probably wrong. There are 4 basic reasons for conflict. Self-centeredness is at the top of the list. What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel. You do not have because you do not ask. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. I don't know that anybody captures it more clearly than James does right there. Chapter 4, verses 1 through 6. Envy, jealousy, comfort, laziness, self-centeredness shows itself in 1,000 different symptoms, but the root cause is self-centeredness. Now, sometimes this is a pretty low bar. This is the reason people have bad days, and sometimes it's a pretty high bar. It's the reason people have a bad attitude and a bad outlook. So when you're trying to decide what kind of conflict you have, you can identify self-centeredness right away, but the question is, how deep is the self-centeredness and how long is it? Because we're all entitled to a bad day. Sometimes people are just disagreeable and there's conflict, but we're all entitled to a bad day. But when self-centeredness is deep and it lasts a long time, then we know that it goes beyond just a bad day or disagreeableness. I once heard a story about Zig Ziglar, who was kind of the first edge of the motivational speaker circuit, for those of you who may not know that name. He told a story about his brother, whose name was Judge Ziglar. He said one day his brother's neighbor came next door and wanted to borrow his lawnmower. Judge looked at the neighbor and said, "Well, I can't loan you my lawnmower because all the flights from Chicago to New York have been canceled today." The neighbor, a little perplexed, looked at Judge and said, "Why does all the flights being canceled from Chicago to New York today affect whether I can borrow your lawnmower?" To which Judge replied, "Oh, it doesn't have anything to do with it, but if I don't want to loan you my lawnmower, one reason's as good as another." Sometimes people are just disagreeable and they want to find a reason not to cooperate. Sadly, this is sometimes because they have staked to a different territory within the church, or they feel strongly about a different decision. They don't really have a decision of their own. They just don't like yours. They're just looking for a reason or for an excuse. So this self-centeredness sometimes is just disagreeableness. Sometimes, though, it shows up in rebellion. As your organization or your location grows, it changes, and some people don't like the change. Maybe before they served on the leadership council, or they had access to you, or they had access to a pastor or access to the boss, or the work was easier, or they didn't have as many responsibilities, or they come to you and where they used to work it was done this way. And when that happens, people have to choose between the mission and old ways of relating to one another. This phrase comes from a pastor on the West Coast named Larry Osborne. He kind of coined the phrase, and it's lived in my head for a long time now. Because as the organization changes, some people just can't deal with the change. They signed on, they attend, they're excited, they give because of how the church was when they first came. And when the church begins to change, it causes internal and sometimes external conflict for them. They are not as excited about the mission as they are about the relationships. Now hear me, those are always going to be in tension. We just have to continue to grow in our relationships and our relating to one another as the mission changes. But there will always be people who are self-centered enough to say, I don't care what the mission is, I just want to be in the relationships as they were. But in a growing church, in a growing organization, the mission and old ways of relating to one another are always in conflict. And some people, when that happens, have to choose, and they don't like the choosing. They don't want to do it the new way. They don't want to report to the new person. They don't want to learn or change or grow. They like the old way. These are the people who you eventually have to get rid of if they're employees because they want a job and you're on a mission. That's not the first time you've heard me say that. They want a job and you're on a mission. They aren't on a mission. There are plenty of places they can go get a job. But your organization, especially the church, is on a mission. I'll come back to that again when we talk about strategies for dealing with conflict, but you have to recognize this reason. Sometimes the conflict is there because they want a job and you're on a mission, or people want comfort. If they're not employees, they want comfort and you're on a mission. If the first basic reason we have conflict is self-centeredness, the second reason is poor performance. There are unacceptable outcomes, or by their performance, they keep creating crisis. Now, sometimes this is out of ignorance, meaning that they don't know how to do what you're asking them to do. Very early on in the life of the church I served, there was a young man who came up after the service and said, I want to pray to receive Christ. And I said, well, let's talk for a minute. He goes, no, I don't want to talk. I want to pray to receive Christ. So I prayed with him, and he looked at me and said, what's next? So I took one of the Bibles that we have, and I marked it in the Gospel of Mark. It's the shortest. It kind of gets to the point. It's a great place for new believers to begin. And I said to him, I want you to read a chapter a day, and then come to my office on Wednesday, and we will talk about the questions you have, or maybe anything you don't understand. Gave him my cell phone number, and he went home after church. About 3 hours later that afternoon, he texted me and said, I'm through with Mark, what's next? I really wish I could get church people to read the Bible as well as unchurched people do, but he asked me what's next. So I replied, let's read John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very similar. John is different, unique. And so I said, let's read John. He replied to me, where's that? He didn't have any point of reference. Sometimes there is poor performance, which creates conflict because people don't know how to do what you're asking them to do, or they don't have enough information. They can't perform at the level you're asking them to because of a gap. Sometimes the poor performance comes because you have the wrong gifts in the wrong place. We had a gap in children's ministry. Our children's minister retired, and we went to the local school system to hire our next children's minister. We hired Jessica. She was great. Everybody loved her as a teacher, but the job of children's ministry in most churches, I'm sure you're aware, is more a principal's job than a teacher's job. And she really wanted to be with children and really wanted to take care of the parents. So she was quickly overwhelmed. We had a choice to make. Why was Jessica not being very effective? Was it that she wasn't any good at her job, or was that she was misplaced? She has stayed on our staff, and we put her in a place that she could excel. She was an excellent office manager, and she managed hospitality and first impressions for a long time. She's a valuable part of our team, and most recently, she became one of our discipleship pastors, and she counsels numerous people throughout the week. She has a tremendous impact, all because we decided that the problem was not that she was not gifted, but that we were asking her to do things that did not match with her gifts. Wrong gifts, wrong place, or right gifts, right place makes a difference when you are in conflict over poor performance. One of the questions you have to ask is this the wrong person? Are these the wrong gifts? Or are they just in the wrong place? Many of you may have heard from Jim Collins's book where he talks about, do they need to be on the bus? And then how do you get them in the right seat on the bus? Sometimes conflict is because they're in the wrong seat. Admittedly, sometimes they need to just get off the bus. However, often if we take time to work through the conflict, we will see very gifted people who just need to be in a different position. Sometimes conflict also is this poor performance is related to they won't perform at the level that you want them to, which is just circle back and listen to everything I said about self-centeredness, because that's the issue. When they know what needs to be done and they just don't want to do it, it's because of some self-centeredness issue.